The best things in life are hard. Tacos, bricks, the door to your house which you should probably check right now, chairs, relationships, and anyway, and let's not forget video games. Since, well, ever, video games being hard has been a staple of their enjoyment for years. Spending hours or controllers trying to learn to beat a section in a game, all for the sweet yet brief god complex you get after finally winning. Such is the joy of hard work paying off. But one of the best and most iconic games to take advantage of that formula is a little game called Dark Souls. This game is known by players and spectators alike for its difficulty. Now, I know what you're thinking when you heard that name. Seriously? This retard thinks Dark Souls is the best game ever made? And you have a justifiable bone to pick. But whether you're a fan of the games or have no idea what I'm talking about, I implore you to just let me cook for a second as I tell you why you should play some of the best games ever made, Dark Souls. Yes, you have been fooled. I'm not just talking about the first game, I'm talking about all three. 1, 2, and 3. So what makes these the best games ever made? Well, for starters, they're so good that they made an entire genre. A genre filled to the brim with juicy titles that all try something different. But we'll talk about that at a different time. There's a lot to talk about, and I'm not even going to talk about everything. Dark Souls games aren't just good because of what's on the surface. Bosses, levels, weapons, and characters pale in comparison to what Dark Souls does to your brain. Dark Souls alters your brain chemistry in ways that make every other game you play after that a little less enjoyable. And it does that by teaching you the valuable lesson: you ain't shit. Matter of fact, the first thing this game does is give you your first taste of freedom just to drop down and beat your head in with a blunt object, forcing you to strategize, learning to make the most of what you have in a world where everything, and I mean everything, is out to kill you and will. Even pigs, and the population of Florida, and Australian wildlife. Oh yeah, and hope you weren't expecting a map. You won't know where you are in this game unless you stumble on it by accident, sheer chance, or unless you look it up through word of mouth. You are just a drooling infant with a stick crawling through a world of traps, gods, and horrors beyond comprehension. Every checkpoint you get feels like a breath of fresh air. Like a soft coat. What did I just say? A breath of fresh air. Like a cozy bed after a hurricane. That is, until you realize you forgot to upgrade your weapon and must make the walk back through the poison swamp or the blinding snowfield that takes away your ability to see literally anything. Or when the game just decides to flip you off and make you want to go back to Minecraft. This does get changed and altered in future games though. In Dark Souls 1 though, you gotta earn that fast travel. But against all odds, when you jump that hurdle, you'll feel like a god. And soon enough, you will be. Dark Souls teaches you humility, hardship, and pride. Now, the best part about Dark Souls games is that there's multiple of them, all of which offer a different experience, improving in ways that make the game better. But we've talked about what Dark Souls has, but what is it? Well, let's talk about it. The first Dark Souls game sets the stage, introducing us to the fictional fantasy land of Lordran. Lordran was once shrouded in darkness until the first flame was discovered. The first four to ever harness the flame's power were known as the Four Lords: Gwyn, Nito, Izalith, and the Furtive Pygmy, who was the ancestor of the human race. Thus began the Age of Fire. Gwyn used the flame to rise to the power as king, establishing the kingdom of Anor Londo, spending his spare time committing hate crimes on dragons. Nito just spent his time spreading death and plagues across Lordran because he could, and we love him for it. Izalith decided to dedicate her flame to helping her family, aiding Gwyn in his racist crimes against the dragons with fire magic. The Furtive Pygmy was doing God knows what. They were just kinda there. All we know is that humans came from that guy. Eventually, Gwyn realized how fire works and that it won't stay lit forever. Izalith tried to make a substitute, but accidentally made Chaos Flame, which later consumed her and her family and gave birth to a race of demons. Which is a normal occurrence, I guess. Gwyn knew what he had to do, but feared the potential strength of humans as time passed. He killed the first flame, sacrificing his humanity to prolong the Age of Fire, turning himself hollow. But he also placed a curse on all of humanity, known as the Undead Curse. This led to humans being cursed with immortality, dying over and over again, becoming insane, losing themselves and becoming a hollow, the lifeless zombies used to scatter throughout the game. Yes, they made a lore reason for fucking respawning. Eventually, on one random evening, you wake up in a cell and break free with the help of a kind stranger. After walking around for a minute, the same stranger, in his dying breath, tells you of a prophecy where an undead like you succeeds the great Lord Gwyn. He sends you off on a quest, and since the world's already ending, you say, why not? and begin your journey to succeed Lord Gwyn and either prolong the Age of Fire or to let the flame die and shroud the world in darkness once more. Those string of events are the most important ones needed to remember when trying to understand these games. Of course, you don't need to understand the game to enjoy it. Dark Souls 1 offered the best blind experience of any of the Souls games I played. I was lucky enough to go through my first Souls game 100% blind. The world building in this game is phenomenal. Every step you take connects all the way back to where you start. The combat is hard but engaging. The bosses are amazing, my favorites personally being Ornstein and Smo, and Sif of Artorias. Every encounter is a learning experience. There's so much to do and see that it's absolutely wonderful, and everything is so scary and powerful that it only adds to the immersion. The music is also insane, all of the boss themes matching the tone and characters fought, and it's just, it's perfect. My favorite part about this game has to be the world building. When you start Dark Souls, you find comfort in the Firelink Shrine, a humble shrine located not too far from where you emerge, where you can rest, improve your healing, and talk to the few locals. But as you play the game and best every enemy, you'll eventually notice that every path you've walked on connects all the way back to Firelink Shrine. It's insane! The world has a haunting emptiness like a party you're late to, and Orlando was just beautiful. I also adore the NPC questlines, but specifically got myself attached to the ones that everyone learns to love, Solaire and Siegmeyer. Solaire, a naive knight searching for his son, his purpose, his motivation, the thing that keeps us from going hollow. As you travel the lands of Lordran, you fight with him and meet him in various places, catching up with him, learning what he has seen and how he's progressed in his journey. Though unfortunately, later on in the game, Solaire hits rock bottom and loses hope in finding his son. When you meet him later on in the game, he has a chance to get infected, and you have to fight with him. But fortunately, there is a way to save him, and believe me when I say I stopped at nothing to make sure Solaire saw through the end with me, even if I did have to look at a walkthrough. Solaire is a G, and he absolutely made the game a little better. Siegmeyer, like you and Solaire, is a traveling knight of Katarina, who you repeatedly encounter in various locations, helping him as he gets himself in various pickles. Eventually, he decides to return the favor, and returns to help you take on a swarm of Chaos Eaters in the Demon Ruins. After this, he asks you to find his daughter, and once you do, you reunite the two, but unfortunately, Siegmeyer does not make it. Both quests are truly fun and enjoyable, despite the possible bleak outcomes, and it's just another reason why Dark Souls has some of the best storytelling that I've ever experienced. Dark Souls is an absolute 10 out of 10 of a game, and I recommend it to everyone wanting to try something new and challenging. The story, the characters, the themes, all beautifully wrapped in a bow for an absolute banger of a game worth your money. And then we get to Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 is an interesting case. Dark Souls 2 is more story driven, but in a different way. In Dark Souls, the main problem that we the player face is that we're broke and have Ligma. In Dark Souls 1, we seek the throne in search of the bag, while dealing with the Ligma. But in Dark Souls 2, you see clarity as to why you have Ligma at all. Traveling the world, learning how Ligma I'm sorry, I can't do this. Learning how the undead curse affects the world. In Dark Souls 2, you are a man stricken with the undead curse, and after it drastically begins to affect your life, you journey across the lands of Drang Lake for not just a cure, but for answers. Dark Souls 2 takes the ideas and concepts of the undead curse and builds upon it, further indulging you into the world of Dark Souls. It also introduces a new time travel-esque mechanic that lets you see into the past, seeing how the consequences of Gwyn affected more of the world than that was shown. The story is really nice to piece together and is definitely the highlight of the game. However, the game is not praised as well as you think it'd be because while yes, it's different, it's also different in pretty noticeable bad ways. Dark Souls 2's story is filled with characters and situations that explore the meaning of life and deal with despair, grief, and longing. Dark Souls 2 explores the plot in less of a go do this and kill these guys way, but more in a psychological, philosophical way that explores the meaning of fate, and as Alia calls it, the illusion of life. What does it mean? What does anything mean? Who are you? What's it all for? Dark Souls 2 is praised for its brilliant storytelling, and I can definitely vouch for that, though it's only remembered by most for its otherwise bad gameplay, which I can also vouch for. Dark Souls 1 has a total of 26 bosses, half of which being mandatory to finish the game. Dark Souls 2 has 41 total bosses, 32 of which being mandatory. Don't quote me on that. Naturally, you would hear that and think, oh, more bosses means more games, so more enjoyment. Well, that's what FromSoft thought as well. There's definitely more bosses, but the sacrifice for more quantity is less quality. A lot of the bosses and gameplay segments in Dark Souls 2 are not necessarily fun or good overall. Dark Souls 2 is home to also one of the worst level and boss fights of any Souls game ever, the Frigid Outskirts. You, the player, must blindly walk across a heavy storm, not knowing or seeing where you're going, and only knowing you're where you need to be when you get jumped by these two coked out horses named Lud and Zalin. There's Ancient Dragon as well, a boss that's not only very underwhelming, but also very glitchy, and the run back if and when you lose is the hardest part. It's also not even a dragon, it's a fake one made by Aldia. It's a poser, damn it. The Blue Smelter Demon is another boss, hidden in a cave filled to the brim with enemies every few steps with weapons the size of Texas. Executioner's Chariot is another boss that no one has just ever liked, and don't even get me started on the Dark Lurker. Though, I think you get the point now. Dark Souls 2 is famous for having an amazing story, but an otherwise lackluster game to go with it. Dark Souls 2 did have decent bosses though. I for one liked the Fume Knight and King alone. As stated before, I and most of the people who played this game enjoyed the story and the narrative more than the actual game itself. The story of the Ivory King and King Vendrick are just absolutely great. Vendrick letting himself go hollow for the good of his people, preventing Nashandra from getting his soul, keeping her away from the Throne of Want. He may have suffered the same fate as Gwyn, but he was a better king than Gwyn ever could have been. Vendrick was a G. Dark Souls 2 absolutely has probably the best story, and because it journeys off and focuses on an entire new narrative, once pieced together and fully experienced, it's just amazing and it makes you love the franchise even more. The boss designs are really cool despite the game kind of having the same color palette. Dark Souls 2 took a more linear approach with the story, but a messier approach with the game. It clearly didn't work as well, but for those who want a good story and don't necessarily care about annoying gameplay, this is absolutely for you. The story is the absolute highlight, and despite the game's flaws, there is enjoyment in Dark Souls 2. However, the next title, in my opinion, does everything right. Dark Souls 3, baby! I love this game the most. But before I talk about it, let's discuss the foggy canon details of Dark Souls endings. In Dark Souls 1, while you are given the choice between shrouding the world in darkness or prolonging the Age of Fire, it's agreed upon by FromSoft and the players that the canon ending to Dark Souls 1 is linking the flame and extending the Age of Fire. In Dark Souls 3, oh boy. In Dark Souls 3, you see the consequences of that. The consequences of history repeating itself over and over, and the first flame being linked over and over and over again. In Dark Souls 3, you have re-emerged in Lordran, now called Lothric. The world is a shadow of itself. Everyone is dead, no one wants to link the flame anymore, and all just feels lost to time. Dark Souls 3 does a very good job at showing you the consequences of your actions. Everyone and everything you meet in this game is either on the brink of death or begging to be. In Dark Souls 3, the four lords are just done. They don't want to link the flame anymore and have gone hollow. You need to physically and violently persuade them into doing their job, or to wind up doing it yourself. They know the consequences, they know the sacrifices, and they know that no matter what they do, it'll all amount to nothing anyway. Dark Souls 3 does everything right. More direct in terms of storytelling, and the bosses, while plentiful, are all unique and equally fun and challenging. You traverse Lothric, the sense of familiarity you have with this place, fading away into sadness as you realize just what has become of this world. Dark Souls 3 makes you feel bad for playing Dark Souls 1. You start the game ready to kick some ass and link the flame again, but as you play more, you question your morals. Is this right? What even is right? You see corpses, bodies, countless people suffering, and it's all because of you. If you have a heart, you'll realize you need to put this world out of its misery, and finally let the first flame fade. And I love this. I love this take. The weapons, the clothing, and overall variety is at its peak in this game. The only bad boss in Dark Souls 3 is probably the big tree asshole, but even then, that's overlookable once you progress further and further into this masterpiece. The enemies are scarier, the bosses are cooler, and it's all fantastic. Dark Souls 1 might be the best game, but Dark Souls 3 is my favorite. My favorite parts of this game have to be Unironically, all of it. The story, the environment, the atmosphere, the bosses, all of it is just magnificent. And normally, I wouldn't talk about this, but Dark Souls 3 has to have one of my favorite final bosses in history. The final boss of Dark Souls 3 is the Soul of Cinder, the manifestation of the first flame. I love this boss. This boss seems to be very weird at first, having no cutscene or dialogue similar to Gwyn. As you fight this boss, you notice he keeps changing his fighting style, from a claymore, to a pyromancy short sword, to a magic mage, to a polearm, and then it clicks. The Soul of Cinder is you. To finally put an end to the story, you need to face the one who caused it. You. You linked the flame. You must now defeat it. The flame that has learned and observed over time just as you did. And this boss fight is pretty hard. I struggled a lot here. The Soul of Cinder is the perfect conclusion, the perfect final boss, and the perfect ending. After you defeat it, you and the Shrine Maiden finally let the first flame fade, and the world is spared as darkness shrouds over the world once more. Dark Souls 3 definitely has the coolest bosses, optional and mandatory. Like, I personally believe that these bosses are just so insanely cool, and I had fun learning and beating all of them. Dark Souls 3 has it all. Amazing story, amazing bosses, amazing combat. I couldn't recommend this game more. It's great. A pure 10 out of 10 once more. Now, listen. I did these games absolutely no justice with my half-baked summaries and breakdowns. Not only are there a lot of other YouTubers who can explain this more and better than I did, but I encourage you to try out these games yourself. And if you already have, then play them again. Go to Journey 36 for all I care. I'm no Vati Vidya or Fighting Cowboy, but I know that these games are some of the best, and their impact on me might differ from how they impact you. But nonetheless, regardless of how hard it might be, I implore you, try Dark Souls. Really try it. I have yet to really say everything I could about these games and why I love them. This was the most my ADHD brain will let me talk about for now. These games have DLCs. I'm not going to talk about them, that's going to be its own video. But I hear from so many people who play Dark Souls and die in the first 10 minutes and quit. But I promise, there's substance here. Don't let yourself miss out on some of the most top tier games, all because of a little cowardice. I'm kidding. Obviously, everything isn't for everyone. I'm really passionate about these games, and I love talking about them. And I'm glad that I can talk about things I love in a way that lets me say what I love about it and convince people to try it themselves. The lesson you should learn from this video is to play Dark Souls, damn it! Every experience, every run is personalized. No experience in Dark Souls is a one-for-one copy of someone else's. Everyone has their own story to tell with this game, and it's amazing. Dark Souls will change how you play games in the best way possible. If you've made it this far in the video, first off I want to say thank you for listening to my rambling. In case you can't tell, I really like Dark Souls. Depending on when this video comes out, I will be streaming the Elden Ring DLC either the 21st or the 22nd. Either way, I will be there, and you can catch me here on YouTube when that happens. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening to me. And most of all, thank you for your patience. Sorry this video took so long. Again, if you saw the post, you know that there was a lot going on in the back. But regardless, thank you for your time, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye!